crack on. My name is Mark Beattie-Edwards. I am the Chief Executive of the Nautical Archaeology Society, and the title of my talk today is Discover the London, Southend's Time Capsule. This is based partly on a talk that I gave on the 7th of March, the anniversary of the sinking of the ship, the London, down in Southend on Sea, and an event that we ran. I've sort of cut it short slightly to fit into the half an hour, so hopefully I'll be able to keep that to time for you. And the idea is to look a little bit at the history very briefly, and then we'll concentrate, of course, for the NAS on the archaeology. And then I will talk at the very end a little bit about what the future may hold for the site, some ambitious plans that we have for what we might do with the shipwreck. So I am the nominated archaeologist to the principal licensee of the site, Steve Ellis. Being a protected shipwreck, Steve has the license to dive the site, and I'm his nominated archaeologist to provide him with help and guidance and assistance, not there to make his life any more difficult. Okay, so we'll crack straight in. And if we look at the image of the London, we are lucky enough to have a few contemporary images. This one here, held by the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich in London by William van der Velde, of the London, gives us an idea of what she looked like. She was actually ordered by Cromwell for Parliament, a 76-gun ship of the line for the Navy of the Commonwealth. So being in the sort of the no royalty at this time after the Civil War, it's not for the Royal Navy at this stage. She was actually built for the Commonwealth Navy. Built at Chatham Dockyard in Kent, not very far away from where she lies today on the seabed of the Thames Estuary, by the shipwright John Taylor, and was launched in the June of 1656. We know a little bit about her history, about her background and her life at sea. We know she was ordered by Parliament on the 3rd of July of 1652 and then launched in the June of 1656. So it takes 4 years from the ordering to the sort of completion of putting it in the water at least. And then it's finished off in the water and then finally commissioned in 1657. Saw a little bit of action, not a great deal of action realistically, 1657, and then was dispatched to the Baltic, although not in a fighting capacity, as part of the sort of reconnaissance of the Danish-Swedish War of 1658 to 1660. Perhaps most famously, she's known for being part of the Royal Fleet that travelled across to the Netherlands in 1660 to bring back Charles II to retake the throne, and we'll come on to that in a second. We know something about the captains and even vice admirals and admirals that were due to command her. So Admiral Sir John Lawson, or Vice Admiral Sir John Lawson, from 1660 to 64. And she's actually laid up in the Medway in 1661 for a few years, masts taken down, before then finally coming back in to use in advance of the Second Anglo-Dutch War. She was destined to become the flagship of Admiral Edward Montagu, actually the benefactor and I suppose the boss really of Samuel Pepys when he was the controller of the Navy. And then it sank in 1665 whilst under temporary command of Sir John Lawson, who in fact wasn't on board. So Sir John Lawson wasn't lost, he wasn't on board when it sank. And again, here he goes, some contemporary images, some held in Rotterdam in the Netherlands, and then these ones here in the middle of the image in the Royal Collection, the ship London on her first voyage dated 1657. So as I referred to, in 1660, in the May of 1660, she's part of the fleet that returns Charles II to England to take the throne. So we know that Charles didn't actually sail on board that ship itself. He sailed on board a different vessel. But we do know that the London did carry Charles's younger brother, James, the Duke of York, who later, upon Charles II's death, becomes King James II in 1658. So royalty certainly did travel on the London, and in fact the London was also involved in a voyage carrying Charles II's sister and mother in 1661. So there's a definite strong royal connection to its latter part of its life. So from February of 1665, she was being prepared for the Second Anglo-Dutch War, which was officially declared by the Dutch on the 4th of March of 1665, when, for no apparent reason, completely accidentally, so not in battle in any way, on the 7th of March, she suddenly blows up in the Thames Estuary. Catastrophic explosion takes place. And we know this from several accounts of several diarists at the time, the most famous of which being Samuel Pepys, who records in his diary on the 8th of March how saddened he was to hear of the news of the loss of the London. She lies sunk with her roundhouse above the water, and how the news was taken very much to heart. He also reports that about 24 men and a woman, in fact, were saved because they were presumably in the upper works. He describes it as in the roundhouse and the coach. So presumably in the upper works at the stern of the vessel, who presumably were either jettisoned or managed to jump to safety at the explosion. So we know this happens, we know it takes place, and we know there's a massive loss of life in the 7th of March in 1665. Now, this is where she lies today. So off of or in between Southend on Sea on the Essex side to the north here, the top of the picture, down between the Isle of Grain in Kent to the bottom of the picture. And as you can see from the image, it lies really close to the navigation channel. I mean, so it's in two separate parts, Site 1 and Site 2 that we know of anyway. Currently, there could be much more of the London on the seabed, but currently Site 1 and Site 2. And Site 2 itself is only about 50 or 60 meters away from that navigation channel. It wasn't found by recreational divers. It was actually, in fact, it was never really lost. We say it was discovered, but it was sort of refound. It sort of came into prominence into the public eye as part of the development works for the expansion of the Port of London Gateway here, funded by DP World, the new port, London Port, alongside other ports such as Tilbury on the Thames. And in advance of that development work and the dredging that was required to get the large ships that would have to wanting to come in to the dock, then as you can see here, 30 historic anomalies, historic wrecks or other anomalies were found, including aircraft on the seabed. And the London is number 7 and 8 in here in terms of the dots. And in fact, I can turn on my snazzy laser pointer and kind of point to where it is. So here, right at the entrance of what's called the Yantlit Channel, it's a very narrow passageway where the water, the depth of water for the vessels becomes quite narrow for them to be able to come in. You can find out more about this in the London Gateway book, Maritime Archaeology in the Thames Estuary, published in 2012, done by Wessex Archaeology, who were commissioned to do the archaeological work for DP World. And this is the geophysics. So this is the geophysical multi-beam surveys of the two sites, as they were called then, 5019, 5029. So on the left-hand side here is what we call Site 2, the one that's closest to the channel. And then on the right is what we call Site 1, the one that's furthest away. We're going to deal mostly with Site 2. In fact, we're going to deal solely with Site 2, really, for the rest of it, because that's where most of the focused, targeted investigation is taking place. And also because that's the site that is most at risk of being lost over future years, and where we are targeting alongside our partners, we're targeting activities and hopefully intensive work to save the material that's on the seabed. So if we look at the geophysics, a bit of a close-up here on Site 2, the red rectangle is the designation area. So it's a protected wreck, protected by Historic England by the Protection of Wrecks Act of 1973 in 2008. This is the designation zone. And to give you an idea of how much of, or where the London is and how much survives, again, if I turn on my laser pointer, there's a few things here of interest. This anomaly here, this higher patch, the sort of yellowy, greeny patch here, that's the main part of Site 2 that we know of as the London, and that straight edge or slightly curved edge, that's the side of the hull. We know we have gun ports, we know we have gun carriages and gunners' implements and guns on the site. There's more of the London or its suspected parts of the London over here, a small anomaly over here, and then another one up here right on the very edge of the designation rectangle. Just to add complication, this bit is another shipwreck known as the King. I'm not sure there is any evidence for its exact identity as being the King, but it's believed to be a 19th century, sort of mid-1800s shipwreck that lies very close to, right abutting Site 2 of the London. And in terms of how much of it survives, well, we know that the London at its keel length when it was built was 123 feet 6 inches, so 37.5 meters roughly. And Site 2 measures about 30 meters long. So we have a large amount of the London surviving here, but we don't know how much, whether we're going down right the way to its keel and back up the other side, and until intensive work is taken place, because so far only 4 real trial trenches have taken place ever on the site. So its location is a blessing and a curse. This is a grab of the Port of London Authority's chart of the location of Sites 1 and 2. And you can see there's Sea Reach Buoy to the north and Sea Reach Buoy number 4 to the south here. And if I just highlight where the actual wrecks are, so there's a wreck there where this red dot is, that's site number 2. And then this wreck here, this red dot, that's where site number 1 is. And if I show you where the navigation channel is, this is where the 300-meter wide main navigation channel is. So this is where the largest vessels in the world will be coming in to both the Port of London and Tilbury, and other even cruise liners coming in down the Thames. And then to the north of that, there's a secondary channel that's 100 meters wide, and to the south, another secondary channel that again is 100 meters wide. So these are the shallower channels for vessels that draw a smaller amount of water, so with shallower drafts, that are able to use these secondary channels if it's necessary to make safe passage in between the larger vessels using the main channel. And to give you a real sense of what it's like on site, if you look at this little video clip, a tiny little 10-second video clip showing the San Felix coming past. And this is filmed by me back in 2016, the very first time I got to dive the site with the group that were doing an excavation here. That is about 50, 60 meters away. And this vessel is absolutely monstrous, 300 meters long, 48.4 meters wide, with a maximum draft of 14.5 meters when it's fully laden. And in fact, I put a picture in the bottom right of it fully laden. This thing is monstrous. And they come past, they're meant to slow down if there is divers on site, but certainly if there are no divers on site, they could be coming past at about 16 knots. So as you can imagine, the wash that's created underwater when something like this is coming past. We dived the shipwreck site 2 at about 18 meters of water on high tide. So this draws 14.5. So it's not that far off the bottom, and it certainly wouldn't be able to come in the channel on the lowest astronomical tide because it would be rubbing down the bottom. So what it means is that wash underwater is creating erosion on the site, and it's meaning the sediments are dropping, material is coming to the surface, artifacts as well as ship's timbers are coming to the surface. If this was on land, just to kind of hammer home the point, if this was on land, this would be a bit like finding the London here, finding it either in the smart lane or what's the hard shoulder, or the smart lane on a smart motorway, or on the hard shoulder. And on a land excavation, of course, if we were building a motorway or if we were building a new train line and a 17th century house or palace was found with human remains on it and very, very rich in material culture, then of course it would be excavated either in its entirety, or it would be excavated and then concreted over for future generations to excavate and to deal with again when that motorway is gone. But unfortunately, underwater, in the case of the London, the site hasn't been fully excavated. And as I said before, only 4 little trial trenches have ever been put on it. That's not to say that resources haven't been spent. A large amount of resources have been spent, nearly £500,000. In fact, it's probably now is £500,000 has been spent so far since 2011 to 2019 by English Heritage and now Historic England. And excavations have taken place. I was part of an excavation team that worked alongside the licensed team and a commercial contractor on the site, and material has been recovered. Over 700 artifacts have now been recovered in total, including a gun carriage, which you can see here in the bottom of the image, which is undergoing conservation. Incredibly rare example of a gun carriage in existence from this period of our Britain's seafaring past. The site is on the Heritage at Risk Register. It has been since 2010. This is England's, maintained by Historic England, England's list of most at-risk heritage assets. In 2019, there were over 5,000 of assets on the Heritage at Risk Register, of which there were only 3 shipwrecks, the London being one of them, the Northumberland and the Rosevike, which are both on the Goodwin Sands. The London is the one that I think personally, because of the impact of man and the ships that are going past, as well as perhaps natural erosion that's taking place on the site, is the one where there's probably the shortest time period we've got left to do anything about the site. Back in 2018, HMS Invincible was also a wreck at risk, but due to 3 years of intensive excavation funded to the tunes of millions of pounds, that shipwreck has been able to be taken off the at-risk register. Underwater, I've got to say, it is an incredibly harsh place to dive. It's one of the hardest places certainly I've ever dived, ever. The tidal conditions can be very strong. Even when the dive team tell you that the slack is on, actually sometimes it's still running half a knot or 0.4 or something. It can take up to 8 minutes to get down to 18 meters onto the bottom. And underwater, the visibility can certainly be less than 10 centimeters, 20 centimeters, as this illustration shows. Every now and then, the dive team get incredibly lucky and get something 1 meter or 2 meters of visibility, but it's incredibly rare. And of course, you have to be in the water an awful lot to get those lucky moments. So that leads me nicely on to the team, the main team that dive this site more often than anyone else are the volunteer divers from the London Shipwreck Trust. Steve Ellis is the principal licensee, that I'm his nominated archaeologist. He's the chap on the right-hand side. This is Carol Ellis in the middle, Steve's wife, and Steve Medal on the left-hand side. I hope they're listening today. A big shout out to the dive team, to them. I'm in awe. These are people that love to dive on the London in the Thames Estuary just for fun, and they do it at their own cost and their own expense, covering their own boat time, taking time off work in order to visit the site, to record it, and to save our heritage for future generations. And some of the material that's been able to be saved by both them and also by the excavations, the small excavations that have taken place, are quite stunning, I believe. So we have a whole plethora of material, of all different material types, as you might expect to find on a shipwreck. And considering that the size of the explosion that took place when it did blow up, the level of preservation in the Thames London clay is just awesome. So we've got the navigational instruments, the things that you'd expect to find for a ship going to sea, a very high status pocket sundial here, where actually the gnomon, the little thing that lifts up in order to cast the shadow, actually the hinge on that still works in beautiful condition with its glass still in place, although a very small crack, as you can see in sort of the bottom right hand side. You've got combs with every single tooth still in place, so no broken teeth on that example at all. The linstocks, the things that are used by the gunners to light the gunpowder for setting off the cannons, this one's actually been used at some point, because you can see the scorch marks here on that linstock in the middle, and then all sorts of other gunners' implements. So these have come up, some of these have come up during the excavations, which have been targeted around the gunport areas. We do have bronze guns, and in fact, you know, it was armed with bronze guns, a whole plethora of bronze guns made by all sorts of different gun founders of different nationalities, many of which actually were thought to have been salvaged at the time. Historians debate about somewhere between 24 and 41 of the bronze guns were recovered at the time. And another entry in Pepys's diary slightly later on, I think it's on sort of the 11th of March, reports that actually the guns could be saved potentially, but that the ship itself was not likely to ever be able to be lifted out of the Thames. So we know that guns were saved, and we also know that some guns were also recovered in the 21st century, early 21st century by divers, recreational divers or salvage divers. We have gun case, cartridge cases, loads of them, an absolute goldmine of gun cartridge cases that the musketeers would have had on bandoliers, leather straps around them, pulley blocks, all sorts of riggings. There's cannonball gauge here conserved and now part of the collection. And some of the things that really hit home about the catastrophe that took place in 1665, we have an inordinate number of shoes, considering the size of the area that's been excavated so far. We have a huge collection of these beautiful leather shoes, some with their strings in place. By all accounts, there's even one that even has the footprint of the owner, who must have been wearing it for quite some time to wear down their heel and their toe prints in the shoe, in the leather of the shoe. Beautiful leather book cover. A tuning peg from a fiddle or a violin. You can imagine the little child powder monkey sitting on the capstan as it's spinning round, fiddling a tune to keep the morale up of the men that are sort of bringing in the cables. And then some spoons, personal items, high value spoons, presumably in pewter. So these are presumably officer spoons, not just the men who presumably would have used wooden spoons. To give credit to the dive team, in 2018, Steve Ellis, the volunteer licensee diver, managed to recover with his teams, with his buddies, managed to recover this small barrel with contents unknown. So the explosion's taken place. It spent, you know, now what, 335 years on the seabed, and you've got every single stave. The hooping's gone, but every single stave survived. The base, the top, and if I use my snazzy laser pointer again, I can even highlight that not only do we have the little tiny hole to empty out the contents, but we also up here have the little plug that would have gone into that hole to stop the contents from coming out. So incredible preservation. But the final thing I want to show you is just to do with, if I can get my mouse to come back, where's my mouse gone? Final thing I wanted to show you is just this. This is a tampion reel. So this is where the tampion, each one of these, this is 6 different tampions, is the plug, the stopper that would go in the end of the muzzle of a gun to stop water or detritus, salt, sand, whatever else going down to a gun to contaminate it. This keeps it nice and clean. If you Google Tampion Reel and you look at Google Images, this is the only single one that comes up on Google Images. So it clearly is a rare. I'm not saying it's the only one in existence. It's clearly not. There are other known examples that I know of, but it's certainly the only one that if you Google on Tampion Reel that you'll actually be able to work out what one is. But it looks in pretty good condition. The sad part is that actually the other side of it looks like this. Because it's not been recovered from the seabed in a controlled fashion, it's been done through rescue archaeology, picking up the scraps off the surface, then this is what the divers would have seen, that the marine organisms have eaten away more than half of this Tampion reel, and the other half of it turned over that's been buried has been able to survive. If you want to see some of the material on display, most of it, unfortunately, at the moment, right, as I talk, is actually undergoing cataloguing at Fort Cumberland, although probably not, because they're all probably not at work, unfortunately, at the moment. But it's undergoing final cataloguing in Fort Cumberland in Portsmouth, where the NAS offices are, before it goes back to Southend on Sea in Essex for ultimate display, curation and display somewhere. But you can see some of it when we're allowed to, and the museum's back open. Then at the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich in London, in the Tudor and Stuart Seafarers Gallery, there is some items on collection, including a candle, some of the pewter pottery, one of the leather shoes, one of the linstocks. In fact, I think it's the exact linstock that I showed you a picture of earlier. So back in July of 2019, we launched the campaign to save the London. And the idea here at Southend, when the exhibition was open at the time in Southend, we launched a campaign to raise the profile and tries to raise funds to help save the London site. And we did this in partnership with the London Shipwreck Trust. And the idea is to raise £200,000 per year to cope with this rate of destruction. And we appreciate that's not a small amount, and that's going to have to be gained through grants and sponsorship, corporate social responsibility budgets, access to that sort of thing, through donations, through individual donations, and maybe through other larger donations through philanthropy. And we're trying to build a consortium of organizations that all have an interest in trying to develop a long-term legacy plan to deal with this at-risk asset for Southend on Sea, because they have a 2050 vision at the council there to really try and realise the economic potential of the heritage that they do have. And the London is part of that. I mean, they have land, terrestrial heritage, of course, but they also have the London, and the museum in Southend is part of that curatorial team to has the long-term responsibility for it. So we want to turn it into an asset. At the moment, I would argue it's a burden on the country. It's not an asset for the country. And the only way we can really turn it into an asset is deal with the problem in the Thames and recover as much as we can for display, for heritage education, and for scientific research. So we're doing that by building a network of organizations. We've done that quite comprehensively, I think, since July, both from the non-for-profit, from the public sector, from the private sector, from academic sector, universities, associations and societies, as well as from industry. So we've had very good talks with the Port of London Authority themselves, DP World, Forth Ports that run the Port of Tilbury, some really great support from engineering companies and consultancies, Perkins and Will, the architects that designed the Mary Rose Museum, Stobarts that run the airport at Southend on Sea, and other museums to get their advice and support to learn lessons for what they've been able to do and been able to build. And then also some high-profile ambassadors to help with our case and our cause. Phil Harding from Time Team, Sir Tony Robinson, again from Time Team, Sir Tim Smith, who set up the Eden Project, and Sir Barry Cunliffe, the archaeologist from the University of Oxford. So what we want to do is we want to take the shipwreck out of the Thames. Our idea is to take it out of the Thames to remove it from its at-risk location. We could excavate it over 10 years, maybe. It would take that long potentially in those conditions to do it in the Thames. But we would be still having to cope with a small team of divers on a barge on a 4-point mooring over the site when the tide's allowed, with vessels like this coming past as close as this. So you could be diving the site and excavating an artifact one day and then go back to it the next day and it's gone. You weren't able to recover it on that particular day. It could have washed away and disappeared. There's no scientific control here. So what we're contemplating doing is doing the research and building the feasibility study for how we might be able to recover it in a way that has been done before. So there is proof of concept for this exists. The idea is now to take the shipwreck on the edge of the dredge channel in 18 meters, to put a box around that site, to hammer a box into the seabed around the site, cover it completely with sand, and then to put a floor in, insert a floor and recover that box to the surface. To put that box on a barge, to bring that barge ashore, tow it ashore, bring it ashore, and then bring the barge into a purpose-built facility on land so that you excavate a shipwreck in a box over a long period of time in a controlled fashion without having to be at that at-risk environment. So this, as I said, this is proof of concept exists for this. It's been done before. In fact, the Chinese did this back in 2007, 13 years ago it was done. So clearly it could be done again if the resources could be found and the demand required. So here it is, some images that have just been captured off the internet. I've not been to China to go and see it yet, but hopefully maybe in the future. So here's the picture of the box coming back onto the barge from underwater, coming ashore, going down a concrete caisson into a purpose-built building, which you can see here. The box went into the building, the museum was built around it, and then the artifacts are excavated. In fact, they're still being excavated now, 13 years on. The team is still excavating it, but actually what they're doing is they're excavating it on land. They're doing land archaeology on a shipwreck in a box. Our thoughts here, our idea here is actually to do this, what the Chinese had thought about doing at the very beginning, which is actually to do it underwater. If you see this image of the box here, actually that's in a swimming pool. You can see the blue box around it and the glass windows for viewing area for people that were meant to be able to look through the water to actually see divers excavating the shipwreck. How to do underwater archaeology in a controlled fashion, using a large team of people to use it for training university students how to do underwater archaeology. But in fact, they ended up draining it, and we don't know why. We're trying to find out why that was. It could be due to water purification issues. It could be all sorts of other reasons why it couldn't be done. But we want to find out that why, because what we'd like to do is an underwater excavation of our box somewhere, preferably in Southend-on-Sea. So if you imagine the box coming out, this is our Mary Rose moment. The box comes out of the water here. So we don't have a whole shipwreck in a cradle that people can see. We just have a very large shipping container with sponsorship logos all down the side of it. And that box comes ashore and it goes into a purpose-built facility. So Perkins and Will, the architects that designed the Mary Rose Museum, have very kindly given us this artwork to give us an idea of what it could look like and where it could be situated. And the idea being that actually the divers could be on umbilicals, they could have helmet cameras, they could have torches and lights, and they could have communications to the surface. And that comms, that dialogue could go straight into the viewing gallery with visiting members of the public, or even via satellites could be streamed to museums and schools all around the world. The educational opportunities for this could be phenomenal, not just for archaeology and history, but also for all the STEM subjects, the science, the technology, the engineering and the maths that would be involved. So this is our kind of final view, our kind of final image of what maybe could happen. There's the shipwreck with the viewing gallery, with the members of the public coming in to watch it. And then maybe we dry it out. Maybe we go and reuse the box. We dry out the timber remains of the ship and we go and reuse the box at some point in the future. That could happen. Maybe we go and save Site 1, or maybe we go and save another shipwreck that's at risk, like the Northumberland or like the Rosevike. So you can find out more about what we're trying to do, and you can support the Save the London campaign. Just Google Save the London or go to the NAS website. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and YouTube and any other tubes, at Save the London, hashtag Save the London, and also the London Shipwreck Trust, at London Shipwreck, hashtag London Wreck 1665. Just to finish you off then with a little bit of, if you want a little bit more of exploring the London for the rest of your lunch break today or at another time, there is a virtual trail sponsored by Historic England and created by MSDS Marine and Cotswold Archaeology. You can do that dive trail by going through the NES website to dive trails, or go directly to cloudtour.tv/London to find it. So hopefully if you've not done that before, go and have a look and enjoy. So it leaves me finally then just very, very pleased and excited to introduce Dr. Innes McCartney from Bournemouth University. We've worked with Innes at the NAS on the Holland 5 submarine out of Eastbourne in the past, and he's going to be giving a presentation same time next week, 12:30 on the 7th of April, on World War I U-boat archaeology. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you found it interesting. Remember to tune in to Innes next week. Until then, stay safe, and I hope you're able to enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.